A wealthy tourist smirked as he hurled a dripping ice cream cone at a royal guard, expecting to see the guard snap out of his stoic stance in a rage. Little did he know, his arrogance would set off a chain of events that would leave him flat, on the ground in more ways than one. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you appreciate stories about respect and dignity, make sure to subscribe so you never miss one. The day started like any other outside the majestic palace, with flocks of people gathering behind the rope barriers to watch the ceremonial changing of the guard. Visitors snapped photos, murmured appreciatively about the bright uniforms, and tried in vain to get a reaction, any reaction, from the tall, silent figures who stood guard as they had done for centuries. The air was filled with that familiar mix of excitement and tradition, a sense that these guards, however silent, carried the weight of national history on their shoulders. For many in the crowd, this was a chance to witness something grand and timeless, a reminder that certain customs stand firm in a constantly shifting world. This particular guard, a middle-aged man with a weathered face beneath his tall, bearskin cap, had served for years. He had endured countless attempts by passers-by to break his composure. He had seen everything from children's giggles to drunken taunts, and he had remained resolute every single time, the living embodiment of discipline. Deep down, he harbored pride in his role. His father had done this duty before him, and his grandfather before that. The uniform represented more than just a job. It was a link to his heritage, a line of service that stretched back through the family tree. Though he never showed it, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Each day he stood there, unmoving, defending a tradition. Not everyone understood or valued this tradition, of course. Some thought it was touristy fluff. Others, like the arrogant visitor, who arrived with a swagger, saw only an opportunity to mock or entertain themselves. The guard, as always, paid no attention. His training was to stand firm no matter the provocation. Little did he suspect that this particular tourist would push the boundaries in a way no one had dared in quite some time. The tourist was a young man, late 20s, dressed in designer clothing with brand names splashed across every piece. His watch glinted in the sun, worth more than some people's entire savings. He had a distinctive smirk, one that suggested the world should cater to him. People stepped aside as he moved, not out of respect, but because his loud voice and brash attitude demanded space. It didn't take him long to notice the guard. He nudged his friends, also dressed to impress, though perhaps not so flamboyantly. "Hey, check out this guy," he said, pointing at the immobile soldier. The guard stood at the palace gate, eyes forward, posture perfect. A hush seemed to fall over the immediate area as the guard towered in his silent vigil. "They say these guys never move. Let's see about that," the tourist scoffed. His tone dripped with arrogance. Within earshot, people looked on with mixtures of curiosity and apprehension. Some visitors had kids in tow, little ones who regarded the guard with wide-eyed wonder. A few of these parents started inching their children away, wary of what might unfold. The tourist wasn't interested in subtlety. He advanced until he was just beyond the rope barrier that separated civilians from the guard's territory. He began making faces, sticking out his tongue, waving his arms dramatically, as if trying to shatter the guard's concentration. Others laughed nervously or watched in uncomfortable silence. The tourist's friends egged him on, pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Still, the guard did not flinch. This only seemed to embolden the tourist further. With the cameras rolling, he started hurling insults. "You just stand there all day, huh? Must be boring," he said, leaning closer than was appropriate. The guard remained stoic, staring straight ahead. The tourist sighed in mock exasperation. "Man, I was expecting a statue, but you're even stiffer than one," he quipped, eliciting scattered snickers from onlookers. The crowd began to sense tension building. an undercurrent of unease as the tourists' antics ramped up. What began as a petty attempt to provoke a reaction was tipping into more serious disrespect. By now, a small circle had formed, people craning their necks for a better view. Some were outraged but did not dare intervene. Others stood in horrified fascination. That was when the tourist decided to take things a step further. He glanced around, noticing an ice cream vendor. With a flourish, he marched over and purchased an overpriced cone, swirling with multiple flavors. He carried it back toward the guard, licking it ostentatiously while making eye contact with the crowd. The guard continued to stand motionless, unwavering, as if carved from stone. The tourist made sure his friends were still recording. "All right, folks," he announced to no one in particular. "Let's see if ice cream gets a rise out of this statue." He took a final lick, then in one swift motion hurled the ice cream cone at the guard's chest. It struck with a sickening splat, sending cold, sticky dribbles down the guard's once immaculate uniform. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense, disbelieving silence. Some onlookers covered their mouths, appalled by the sheer disrespect. In those fleeting moments, everything hung in the balance. Everyone wondered if the guard would maintain his composure, or if this was the point where he would finally snap. The tourist, for a second, looked triumphant. He'd done the unthinkable. He'd tested the guard's legendary stoicism in the most humiliating way possible. People waited for the guard to lunge forward or for official security to swarm. Instead, he blinked slowly, the only betrayal of his calm facade. Then, with exacting slowness, he removed one gloved hand from its position and reached for a handkerchief. The hush deepened, and you could practically feel the crowd holding its breath. The tourist's initial smirk began to falter as he realized the full weight of what he had done. Now that the comedic moment had passed, the repercussions seemed all too real. All eyes were locked on the guard. With absolute deliberation, the guard dabbed at the splattered ice cream on his uniform, each movement filled with precision. Every second felt charged with tension. No one spoke. No one dared to. The tourist's bravado melted away in the face of unyielding composure. And then, with a calm voice that seemed to resonate through the air, the guard broke his silence. After the ice cream lands and the crowd reacts in collective horror, the guard sets the stage for the deeper moral lesson. He does not rush into anger or aggression. Instead, he deliberately cleans the mess from his once pristine uniform, which has become a canvas for the tourist's foolishness. The patience and self-control in his actions command immediate respect, causing even the most cynical observers to hold their breath. The guard, who for so long has stood silent, now decides to speak. His voice, steady and grave, penetrates the stunned hush that has settled over the people gathered. In that voice is an unexpected authority, centuries of tradition, discipline, and unwavering honor. As the guard lifts his gaze, for the first time truly looking at the arrogant visitor, the crowd senses the magnitude of what is about to be said. It's a moment where a single man's dignity stands in stark contrast to another man's frivolous arrogance. The tension is palpable, making every second stretch out. The guard finally addresses the tourist, but his words are measured. There's no fury in them, no immediate condemnation. Instead, he speaks of the history behind the uniform, of all those who have worn it before him, men who have faced war, adversity and loss, and continued to serve. He explains that standing here is not a mere job, but a sacred duty that echoes the sacrifices of countless predecessors. The crowd listens in silent reverence. Some nod in agreement, while others, including the tourists' friends, shift uncomfortably. A few reach up to stop their phone recordings, almost embarrassed at the role they played in this spectacle. The Guard's composure shines a light on the visitor's pettiness, revealing just how childish and disrespectful his actions have been. The tourist, for his part, tries to maintain the facade of cool detachment, but the cracks in his confidence show. His cheeks flush, and he glances around for moral support from his friends, finding none. The crowd's sentiment has turned decidedly against him. He mumbles something about just having a bit of fun, though his words carry little weight. Now, the guard acknowledges that once upon a time, as a novice, he too had wondered why the palace upheld such a rigorous tradition of silence and composure. But in enduring the daily provocations and upholding a larger heritage, he learned that discipline is more than remaining still. It is a code of conduct that speaks to who you are when tested. He glances at the congealing mess on his uniform, the sticky residue of an act meant to demean him, and then lifts his head to meet the eyes of his antagonist. The guard's voice does not rise in anger. Instead, it remains calm, almost sorrowful. He speaks of how easily people discard respect these days, how quickly they move from amusements to mocking, and how small that makes us. The hush in the crowd grows heavier. Even the children, who had been fidgeting just minutes ago, sense the gravity of the moment. There's something instructive here, more than a dressing down. It's as though the guard is reminding them all of something deep and essential, something so often overlooked in an era when everything is a quick laugh or a viral moment. On the receiving end, the tourist tries to muster an apology, though it wavers. He knows he's overstepped, and the realization that the crowd, and possibly the world beyond it, will judge him harshly begins to sink in. His friends have already distanced themselves, physically taking a step back, as if to signal that they are not part of his behavior. The guard, after finishing his calm words, stands tall again. The moral strength in that posture says what words cannot. Rather than lash out or demand punishment, he simply resumes his disciplined stance, as though he has already made his point in full. This leaves the tourist in a precarious position. Everyone is looking at him, waiting for him to respond, to react, to show some measure of contrition. The tourist stammers, perhaps intending to spin the situation or justify himself, but no one is in the mood for excuses. The crowd is restless, uncomfortable with the tension. Some cast him disapproving glances, while others seem to hope that the tourist will find it in himself to admit fault. And yet the guard, having spoken his piece, does not press further. His restraint, ironically, holds more power than any reprimand could. In that unspoken silence, the tourist's bravado has nowhere to go. It simply fizzles out. He feels cornered by public judgment, but also by the realization of his own smallness in that moment. The guard's choice to exercise self-control becomes the most potent lesson, one that resonates with everyone witnessing this confrontation. It becomes clear that the real conflict is not about a thrown ice cream cone or even a uniform. It's about how dignity rises above petty offense, how the strength to remain calm in the face of direct humiliation can be more impactful than any physical retaliation. The guard's words, echoing with respect for tradition and service, hang in the air, a quiet admonition to all who would behave similarly. Only moments before, the tourist had commanded the crowd's attention with his money and bravado. Now the guard holds everyone captive through the sheer moral force of self-restraint. They stand there, a few steps apart, one man in a messy, designer outfit looking shaken, the other in a slightly stained uniform looking composed. And as the tourist attempts to salvage his reputation, he can only stammer an apology that the guard silently, if not visibly, accepts. With that, the crowd releases a collective exhalation. People sense a shift, a resolution of tension, though something far more profound remains. The guard's words linger, a universal reminder that true strength is not in reacting with violence or anger, but in staying true to one's duty and moral code, even when tested by the worst provocations. The event, having just unfolded in front of numerous onlookers, begins to ripple outward. People who filmed the encounter huddle together, replaying the footage on their phones, the guard's calm speech echoing from tiny device speakers. Others step away entirely, shaken by what they've seen, muttering comments of disbelief or condemnation at the tourists' behavior. Parents pull their children aside, whispering lessons about respect and decorum. The tourist stands there, ice cream now crusting on the ground, feeling the weight of the aftermath. He realizes he's become an object of collective judgment. His face reddens, though he tries to regain composure by brushing off his shirt, as though his biggest concern were a few stains. For the first time, a flicker of genuine embarrassment flickers across his features. Some in the crowd debate whether security will intervene. After all, assaulting a guard, even if with an ice cream cone, might be grounds for official reprimand. A few official personnel on the outskirts observe the scene, conferring quietly, deciding whether to step in. In the end, the guard's calm handling of the situation seems to diffuse immediate confrontation. Yet a buzz of conversation grips the courtyard. People speak in hushed, urgent tones about what they've witnessed. The tourist tries to walk away, but each step is dogged by the stares of those who see him as a living example of self-centered arrogance. He casts a glance over his shoulder at the guard, who has returned to his poised stance, not sparing another look. That dismissal, the guard's complete refusal to be rattled, stings more than any heated argument might have. The guard's stoicism, combined with that measured rebuke, has effectively dismantled the tourist's arrogance. Now, the tourist trudges off, shoulders slumped, feeling smaller than he ever has. He lowers his gaze when he sees children pointing at him, or older folks shaking their heads. He checks his phone as if searching for some distraction, but the notifications from his friends do not offer much comfort. The entire group that accompanied him seems split. Some drift away, others quietly criticize him to his face. The unraveling of his social circle happens so quickly that he's left with only a few stragglers who don't know what to say. Gradually, the crowd disperses. The guard remains at attention, unshaken, a testament to discipline. Those who stay behind linger out of admiration or curiosity. A few approach him, perhaps wanting to thank him or offer words of respect, but they keep a respectful distance. They know the custom. You do not interfere with a guard at his post. The palace stands as it always does, grand, immovable, a monument to tradition. It seems to reinforce the guard's presence, highlighting how petty the tourists' actions were in the larger context. Voices carry across the courtyard, stories forming about what just happened. A privileged man humiliating a symbol of national pride, only to be confronted with unwavering dignity. These stories spread swiftly. Within minutes, someone has uploaded footage online, captioned with outraged commentary. Some posts show the guard calmly brushing away the ice cream. Others capture his short but impactful speech about tradition and respect. The first comments trickle in from across the internet, many praising the guard's composure, some calling for the tourist to face repercussions. Meanwhile, the tourist disappears into the city streets, a mixture of shame and anger burning inside him. He can't quite decide whom to blame for his downfall, himself, the guard, the crowd, or his so-called friends who didn't stand up for him. But deep down, he knows the blame is his alone. It's an unsettling realization for someone who has always escaped true accountability. Hours later, as the sun dips and the palace courtyard empties, a hush returns to the guard's station. Tourists who come for the twilight hours find a mostly quiet scene, unaware of the dramatic event that transpired earlier. The guard completes his shift, eventually relieved by another equally stoic comrade. He walks away with measured steps, the faint dryness of leftover ice cream on the fabric, a subtle reminder of the day's incident. But within him, there is no turmoil, no lasting anger. He performed his duty. More than that, he rose above a base provocation with the dignity that has become the hallmark of his calling. It's only later, when he returns to the barracks, that he learns how quickly the video is spreading. Colleagues approach him with wide-eyed respect, commending him not just for controlling his temper, but for speaking so eloquently about the service. They tell him that the public is rallying behind him, praising him as an example of what it means to wear that uniform with pride. He nods, accepting the praise quietly, but without vanity. His mind drifts to the tourist, hoping the man reflects on his behavior. The guard would prefer the tourist walk away having learned something, rather than simply be punished. In a world that often glorifies revenge or instant retaliation, the guard's stoicism sends a different message. Sometimes, the greatest comeback is simply standing tall and letting the truth of one's honor speak louder than any retort. And so, the night passes. The guard rests, preparing for another day on duty, knowing that the flood of attention might await him in the morning. Even so, he does not crave fame or recognition. His role remains the same as it has always been: to stand, observe, protect, and uphold tradition. Yet the seeds of what happened today have already taken root. People across the city will discuss it, from small cafes to schoolyards and offices, some in hushed voices, others in heated debates. Respect, tradition, and self-restraint, concepts that many dismiss as outdated, are suddenly at the forefront of discussion again. The guard sleeps well, untroubled by the day's events. Far from being shaken, he feels reaffirmed in his purpose. Meanwhile, in some fancy hotel or upscale apartment, the tourist tosses and turns, haunted by the memory of the guard's unyielding calm. The tourist wonders how a single moment of trying to be entertaining or edgy unraveled so spectacularly. He can't help but check social media, seeing the video climb in views, accompanied by thousands of comments condemning his actions. The moral lesson has already started to echo far beyond the palace gates. With each replay of the footage, watchers around the world see, in living color, how self-respect deflects humiliation. It's a subtle but powerful testament to the age-old truth that dignity often wins where bluster fails. And so the story transitions to a broader stage. The guard's measured words and calm presence become an emblem for those who yearn for examples of integrity in modern times. The internet, so often a place of fleeting distractions, latches onto this moment of clarity. A man, tested in public, reminding us that no matter how loud or brazen another person's provocation might be, composure can be the ultimate act of strength. As the footage continues to spread, discussions erupt in living rooms, social media channels, and among circles of friends. People share personal anecdotes about times they faced insults or bullying, comparing them to the guard's measured response. Newspapers pick up the story in the next day's issue, some focusing on the tradition of royal guards, others condemning the tourists' blatant disrespect. The guard's calm, dignified speech is transcribed word for word, resonating with readers from different walks of life. The event morphs into something larger than a mere incident between a guard and a troublemaker. It becomes a symbol of how an age-old institution can uphold values that seem lost in an era of instant gratification and viral pranks. Debates swirl around whether the tourist should be penalized further. Some argue he deserves a hefty fine for disturbing a ceremonial duty. Others say public shame is enough. The guard, for his part, refrains from giving any further statements. He continues his routines. Each day, as he assumes his position, the crowd around him has grown. People recognize him from the video. They watch him with admiration, some offering respectful nods or applause, though quietly in recognition that the guard is still on duty. Tourists from abroad take pictures, hoping to capture a moment of calm strength. Despite the surge in attention, the guard remains as he has always been, focused, still, and unyielding. He appreciates the gratitude but does not seek it. His superiors commend him privately for handling the situation with composure, which upholds the institution's long-standing values. This is enough for him. Meanwhile, the once cocky tourist finds himself at the center of an online firestorm. As his face circulates, many openly condemn his actions. Memes pop up overnight, ridiculing his throw and praising the guard. Strangers flood his social media accounts with criticism, calling him the epitome of entitlement. At first, the tourist tries to brazen his way through the backlash, leaving mocking replies or blocking people who question him. But the volume of disapproval is overwhelming. His friends distance themselves to avoid the negative spotlight, and a few even publicly criticize him for dragging them into such an ugly incident. He can't step outside without feeling that the world recognizes him as the ice cream thrower. Eventually, pressure mounts. He issues a statement, part apology, part excuse, saying he meant no harm and that it was just a prank gone wrong. The statement rings hollow for many who saw the look on his face when he threw the cone. He adds that he regrets insulting someone's proud tradition and that he respects the guard's composure. While this admission is a step toward atonement, it is overshadowed by his earlier cavalier display of arrogance. The conversation worldwide continues. Commentators and influencers seize on the story, offering their perspectives. Some question how society reached a point where humiliating public servants becomes entertainment. Others applaud the guard as a role model for how to conduct oneself when targeted by disrespect or aggression. Schools start referring to the incident as a teachable moment. Teachers show the video in class discussions on bullying and respect for authority. They highlight the guard's stoic handling of the situation as an example of how to respond with dignity. Parents bring up the story at the dinner table, using it to emphasize the value of empathy and courtesy. The result is a significant boost in public discourse around honor and service. Soldiers and veterans share their own stories of unwavering discipline, drawing parallels to the guard's calm. Some talk about how tempting it can be to fight back when provoked, but how training instills a deeper sense of duty and pride. The story resonates across all backgrounds, finding universal appeal in the guard's approach. Gradually, the tourist starts to realize the magnitude of what he has done. No amount of money or prestige can erase the widespread condemnation. He reflects on how easily he let his ego lead him down such a path. He reaches a point of genuine remorse, or at least what seems like it. In a final, more sincere apology, he admits that he saw the guard as a prop for his own entertainment. He declares that he has learned a lesson in humility. Only time will tell whether this personal transformation is lasting or merely another act. For the guard, the day concludes as any other. He finishes his shift and returns to a quiet, personal routine. At most, he might exchange a few words with fellow guards or read a brief online summary about the incident before setting it aside. He reminds himself that tomorrow he will stand in the same spot, performing the same duties. He draws comfort from the continuity, from the knowledge that his role transcends daily controversies. As night falls, the day's spectacle becomes fodder for late-night conversations. People share their opinions, exchange views on morality, discuss the lines between a harmless prank and an outright assault. One thing is clear: the guard's speech and calm reaction have already carved out a lasting impression. Where the tourist sought to belittle him, he instead elevated the guard's quiet strength for all to see. Thus, the story spreads, carried by word of mouth and countless replays of the video. It serves as a mirror that reflects the stark difference between thoughtless mockery and disciplined composure. Those who watch and listen cannot help but reflect on how they themselves might react under such provocation. By now, the event has become more than a flash-in-the-pan viral sensation. It's evolving into a reminder that the past still holds lessons for the present. The centuries-old tradition of standing guard, so often trivialized as mere performance, has proven to be a powerful metaphor for unwavering moral fortitude. And in a world often quick to anger, the guard's restraint stands out, shining a spotlight on what real strength can look like. The tourist, reeling under public scrutiny, finds it difficult to face life as usual. Friends who used to admire his flashy lifestyle now keep their distance. When he goes to a restaurant, he overhears whispered conversations about him being the ice cream thrower. Even staff members look at him differently, some with open contempt. It hits him that his actions, meant as a momentary joke, have reshaped his identity in the eyes of many. A few tabloids pick up the story, splashing sensational headlines like "Privileged man attacks Royal Guard with ice cream" across their pages. The coverage includes still frames of the guard's uniforms spattered with melting ice cream, capturing the exact moment of impact. The tourist feels humiliated by the media spotlight, but it's a mirror he can't escape. Something breaks inside him as he confronts the enormity of his mistake. He realizes that no matter how hard he tries to spin the narrative, the images and videos speak for themselves. The guard had done nothing to provoke such an attack. He was simply performing his duty. The tourist's guilt festers. At night, he replays the scene in his mind, remembering the guard's calm eyes, the quiet authority in his voice. He wonders why he felt the need to demean another human being. Gradually, and perhaps for the first time in his life, he feels true remorse. To cope, he shuts down his social media profiles temporarily, avoiding the barrage of angry messages. He considers leaving the country sooner than planned. Yet a part of him feels compelled to set things right, or at least try to. After days of deliberation, he makes an attempt at a personal apology. He visits the palace early in the morning, hoping to catch the guard before his shift, but security is tight. A junior guard politely informs him that the guard in question is on a different rotation. Though disappointed, the tourist leaves a letter behind, addressed to the guard, in which he confesses how his ego led him astray and that he deeply regrets his disrespect. He doesn't know if the guard will ever receive it or read it, but the simple act of writing it helps him confront the gravity of his choices. Across town, the guard has no idea about the letter. He's more focused on fulfilling his obligations. He wakes before dawn, dresses meticulously, checking every detail of his uniform. There's a renewed sense of purpose in his heart, knowing that his words and example have rippled far. His fellows joke about him being a minor celebrity now, but he does not let the attention distract him. He sees it as just another day of service, albeit one that carries a subtle shift. People now look at him with open respect. During his next shift, the atmosphere around him feels different. Visitors approach with more caution and reverence. Some offer a quiet salute or a nod. One elderly veteran of a foreign army stands for a long moment, tears in his eyes, saluting from behind the barrier in a gesture of brotherhood and admiration. These quiet acknowledgements move the guard in ways he cannot show. In a sense, he's become the living embodiment of a larger lesson, and that lesson continues to resonate. Families pause to whisper to their children about how this guard stood up to disrespect without losing his composure. The children regard him with a kind of awe. Their parents hope they can absorb the deeper meaning, that kindness, respect, and self-control matter more than showy displays of pride. Meanwhile, more stories spring up online, analyzing the footage of the incident in detail. Some break down the guard's facial expressions, trying to gauge the exact moment he decided to speak. Others praise his body language, noting how he maintained discipline even in the face of blatant provocation. The tourist's face, captured in high definition, has also become a subject of endless dissection, viewers pointing out the smug grin that preceded the throw, then the shock that followed. Wherever the tourist goes, recognition follows. Taxi drivers, hotel clerks, passers-by, they all seem to have seen the viral clip. His attempts to move incognito fail. Ultimately, he accepts that running from this won't help him. If he wants any measure of closure, he must face his actions head-on. Slowly, he starts adjusting his behavior, offering genuine politeness where before he might have been dismissive. He begins to tip service workers kindly, hold doors open, utter small courtesies. Though it might appear superficial to some, these gestures mark an internal shift. The spotlight from the fiasco has forced him to re-evaluate himself. He can't escape the consequences, so he decides, however begrudgingly, to change how he relates to others. On a broader scale, the public conversation continues. Some see the tourist's plight as well-deserved, proof that arrogant behavior has no place in polite society. Others wonder if the tourist should be hounded forever for a single, if appalling, mistake. Yet almost everyone applauds the guard, finding comfort in a real-life scenario where dignity prevailed without violence. Each new article or video commentary hammers home the same moral. In a confrontation between unbridled arrogance and disciplined composure, composure often triumphs. The tourist, still feeling stung, takes solace in the fact that people are now focusing more on the guard's speech than his humiliating act. But he can't escape the label of the one who threw ice cream at the guard. It follows him like a shadow. He might leave the country, he might try to reinvent himself elsewhere, but the video will forever be a part of the digital record. In the quiet corners of his hotel room at night, he wonders if he will ever be free of that moment. He tries to imagine how the guard himself must have felt, standing there, humiliated yet never losing his sense of self or decorum. The tourist realizes that kind of inner strength is something money can't buy. It's a discipline forged through years of training and a deep sense of responsibility, and that is perhaps the biggest takeaway for him. Day by day, as the story continues to swirl around him, he starts to internalize the guard's lesson. Arrogance led him to throw that cone, but it's humility that might help him move forward. Though it may be too late to fix his public image, it's not too late to fix himself. And so, whether he fully recognizes it or not, the tourist has begun a transformation. Each morning, as he contemplates what steps to take next, he feels the pang of regret, but also a flicker of hope that perhaps he can grow from this. Meanwhile, the guard stands unwavering at his post, a silent pillar of integrity in a chaotic world. In that single act of meeting offense with honor, he has reminded everyone who witnessed or heard about the incident that there is real power in quiet courage. The tourist might have taken him for a statue at first, but in truth, the guard demonstrated the most human quality of all, the ability to remain kind and balanced, even when faced with deliberate humiliation. Days pass, then a week, and the incident remains a hot topic of conversation, fueled by the continuous sharing of the video. The environment around the palace changes subtly. People approach the guards with more reverence, mindful that the stoic figures standing at attention are not mere ornaments, but individuals who carry a profound sense of duty. The tourist's letter eventually reaches the guard through the appropriate channels. He reads it in private, taking in every word of regret. and self-reflection. The guard doesn't judge the sincerity of the apology. He merely acknowledges that the man has taken a step toward accountability. Still, official protocols prevent him from personally responding. Instead, he folds the letter neatly and sets it aside, feeling some measure of relief that the tourist has at least attempted to make amends. Meanwhile, the tourist, though still haunted by his public persona, finds a faint sense of purpose in the aftermath. He enrolls in an online ethics class, seeking to better understand the principles of respect and empathy that he so flagrantly disregarded. For a man who once believed wealth and connections were the pinnacle of success, it's a humbling experience to read about moral philosophy and civic responsibility. He no longer flaunts his expensive clothes in quite the same way, and he struggles to maintain the bravado that once defined him. His social circle shrinks, but he grows closer to a few people who are genuinely supportive, ones who offer honest advice rather than shallow admiration. In quiet conversations with these friends, he admits how terrifying it was to see the disgust in people's eyes, to realize that he'd earned universal condemnation with a single impulsive act. They encourage him to keep learning, keep apologizing where he can, and let time do the rest. Across the city, the footage of the guard's measured speech is repeatedly played in various settings. Schools showcase it during assemblies, using it as a lesson in emotional intelligence. Offices conduct quick seminars on workplace respect, citing the guard's posture and calm retort as an example of de-escalating conflict through dignity. The once forgotten notion that respect must be shown to those who serve, be they military personnel, security guards, or civil servants, gains renewed traction. People start referencing the guard's words, particularly one phrase that resonates deeply. Respect isn't demanded, it is revealed in how we respond to insult. This line appears on social media banners, educational pamphlets, and is even quoted by a politician at a press conference discussing civility in public discourse. The guard, however, remains largely removed from the spectacle. His daily life continues in the methodical rhythm of service. Each day he goes to his station, stands his shift, and returns to rest, physically and mentally. The sudden fame neither elates him nor throws him off balance. He comprehends that at any moment, the public eye might move on to the next viral moment, and he'll be left with the same responsibilities that have always guided him. Occasionally, well-wishers gather near the rope barrier, hoping to catch his attention. Some even call out words of support. He does not turn or acknowledge them beyond a subtle shift of his eyes, because that is his duty, to remain impassive as a sentinel of tradition. And in a way, it's that unwavering commitment that has endeared him to so many. One morning, a group of military veterans from different countries arrive unannounced. They stand back, quietly observing the guard for a few minutes. Then, as a sign of solidarity, they each salute in his direction. Although they know he cannot officially respond, they sense his quiet acceptance. Camera crews, alerted by passers-by, capture the emotional moment, further solidifying the guard's status as a symbol of respect. Yet he does not let it inflate his pride. He takes it all in stride, channeling any admiration he receives back into the seriousness of his role. As for the tourist, curiosity drives him to watch new videos of the guard posted by travelers. He notices how the guard continues to stand with the same composure, day after day, unaffected by the storm that once engulfed them both. Something about this steadiness strikes a chord deep within him. The tourist realizes that money and status might influence one's life circumstances, but they don't necessarily instill the kind of resolve that the guard exhibited. This insight leads the tourist to reassess his priorities. Perhaps, he thinks, there is more to life than chasing fleeting thrills or flaunting his possessions. He begins working with a counselor recommended by a friend, exploring why he felt the need to belittle someone in uniform. He confronts old memories of being ignored or neglected, where proving his worth became paramount to his identity. It's not an easy process, but the tourist finds that examining his vulnerabilities actually makes him feel lighter. Meanwhile, social media remains a battleground of opinions. Some argue that the tourist deserves ongoing condemnation, while others point out that everyone makes mistakes and that the guard's response demonstrated the path toward understanding and forgiveness. In forums and comment sections, the debate rages. Should the tourist be forgiven if he truly learns from this? How long should society punish him for a moment of reckless disrespect? The guard, of course, is not privy to these debates. From his vantage point, the world is simpler. He stands at his post, fulfilling a duty that transcends daily controversies. Sometimes he sees a flicker of recognition in visitors' faces, or glimpses a stranger quietly saying "thank you" from a distance. But he remains the same disciplined figure, carrying the mantle of a tradition older than any social media platform. At long last, another changing of the guard takes place, and the weather changes. Dark clouds gather over the city, threatening a downpour. Tourists and locals huddle under umbrellas and raincoats. The guard endures the elements, unflinching as droplets roll off his bearskin cap. One figure stands out, a man in a modest raincoat, head lowered, almost blending into the background. It's the tourist, braving the rain to see if he can once more catch sight of the guard. He watches from afar, noticing how people around him still point or whisper his name, but he seems less concerned about their judgment and more focused on observing the guard in his element. The guard doesn't break form, naturally. The moment is surreal for the tourist. He recalls that day when he swaggered up to the guard, full of misplaced confidence. Now he stands humbled, just another face in the crowd, seeking perhaps a private moment of closure. The guard remains a figure of quiet fortitude, as unyielding as the palace walls behind him. The tourist can almost feel the lesson sink deeper into his bones. That true respect for oneself and for others is not about showmanship. It's about action, service, and the willingness to endure life's tests with unwavering principles. As lightning flickers in the distance and thunder rolls overhead, the tourist sighs, gently turning to leave. There is no dramatic confrontation, no grand apology scene, just the recognition that the guard's gift, a lesson in humility, has reshaped his understanding of the world. He takes that lesson with him, letting the rain wash away the lingering shame of that ice cream cone throw. Though his reputation may be tarnished for years to come, the seed of real transformation has been planted. And so, the guard and tourist occupy the same place once again, one quietly fulfilling his duty, the other quietly absorbing his new insights, both forever changed by a single, unforgettable act of provocation and restraint. The story's reverberations extend beyond personal lessons for the guard and the tourist. In smaller ways, it touches the collective conscience of anyone who sees or hears about the incident. People question how they themselves might react under sudden provocation. Some realize that they too often respond to insults with anger, fueling the cycle of hostility. They see in the guard a different approach, one that channels discipline into a simple yet powerful statement. Word of the guard's composure even reaches certain civic leaders who incorporate references to the incident in talks about social responsibility. One local official proposes a short community program titled "Standing Firm," aimed at teaching conflict resolution skills and emotional regulation to at-risk youths. In these sessions, the guard's viral moment is highlighted as a demonstration of nonviolent strength. On the day the program is announced, the official invites the guard to a small ceremony. The guard receives the invitation with some hesitation, as he's not accustomed to public speaking or fanfare. Initially, he contemplates declining, preferring to remain in the background. But his commanding officer suggests it might be a good opportunity to inspire others positively, and so, after some deliberation, the guard agrees to attend. At the ceremony, he is introduced to a room of young people who have struggled with anger management issues. Some of them have come from difficult backgrounds, where conflict is settled through aggression. They sit quietly, a bit skeptical. When the guard steps forward, dressed in a more formal, less ceremonial uniform, a hush settles. He speaks briefly. He's no orator, after all, but his few words carry weight. He explains that standing at the palace gates each day is more than a job. It's a responsibility to uphold the core values of the institution he serves, which he considers to include courtesy, respect and calm under pressure. He describes how each guard trains for situations far more threatening than a thrown ice cream cone, but that the principle remains the same. If one can't keep composure in the face of smaller provocations, how can one be trusted to handle larger crises? The youths listen. Some are intrigued that someone with such a stoic reputation can speak about personal feelings, about the brief surge of anger he felt when that cone hit him, and how he had to consciously suppress it. He admits he isn't immune to emotion, but that discipline trains one to respond thoughtfully rather than reflexively. The sincerity in his voice resonates. People realize that restraint is not passive. It's an active choice that requires deep inner resolve. When the guard finishes, the official thanks him. The applause is polite but earnest. The guard departs soon after, returning to his usual routine. Yet, for several of those youths in attendance, his message lingers. They discuss it among themselves, marveling that a man can face insult so publicly and yet remain respectful. Some vow to try similar restraint in their own lives, even if it means starting with something as small as not shouting back when provoked. Back at the palace, the public still throngs. The tourist stops by again, this time carrying no illusions of grandeur. He blends in with the crowd, which has become a daily occurrence, people from all walks of life wanting a glimpse of the unshakable guard. The tourist listens quietly as a mother explains to her daughter the significance of the guard's stance. She recounts the now famous moment, describing how the guard refused to retaliate or degrade the uniform he wore. The daughter, wide-eyed, seems entranced by the lesson. The tourist lowers his gaze, aware that he is the villain in the story the mother is narrating. But strangely, he doesn't resent it. Instead, he feels a certain responsibility to do better, to ensure that if he's ever brought up again in conversation, it might be as someone who learned a crucial lesson rather than as a perpetual symbol of mockery. Days stretch into weeks, and the palace routine continues. The guard remains the same consistent presence. He occasionally hears updates from colleagues about how the story remains popular online, that more positive outcomes are unfolding, like the community program or new calls for respectful behavior toward all public servants. He takes comfort in these developments, sensing that his small moment of resolve might have sparked broader change. He also receives random letters from strangers, school children writing to say they learned about him in class and want to thank him for the lesson. An elderly man who recalls his own days of service and expresses pride in the guard's actions, and even a few ex-bullies who say they never realized how damaging their actions could be until they saw this viral moment. The guard feels humbled by the outpouring of support. Nevertheless, he keeps his life simple. He does not seek interviews or public appearances, politely declining several offers from talk shows looking to capitalize on the viral event. He believes the uniform he wears is not a platform for personal fame, but a mark of communal service. His quiet refusal to cash in on the hype further endears him to those who admire authenticity. Meanwhile, the tourist undergoes his own transformation. He decides to volunteer with a local youth group, hoping to redeem himself in some small way. On the first day, he meets skeptical young teens, many of whom have read about the ice cream incident online. They recognize him, and not in a positive light. Rather than try to hide it, he admits his fault up front, telling them he's there to be better. His initial honesty breaks the ice, and over time, he shows genuine interest in supporting their personal growth. The road ahead for him is still steep. Not everyone forgives or forgets. Some publicly ridicule him when he's recognized in stores or on the street, still bitter about how he disrespected a national symbol. But the tourist learns to endure it, taking cues from the guard's example. He responds with quiet understanding, never lashing out, sometimes offering a humble nod if confronted. Word spreads that the ice cream thrower is trying to mend his ways. Though public sentiment remains mixed, the shift in his behavior softens some hearts. A few individuals who once cursed his name now comment online that at least he's making an effort. While some cynics dismiss it as a ploy for redemption, others argue that if a person is genuinely trying, they deserve a second chance. In this manner, two parallel arcs continue. The guard maintaining his post and inspiring people through example, and the tourist working to regain his dignity by acknowledging his wrongdoing and striving to be better. Their paths do not intersect directly again, but they remain intrinsically linked by that single fateful moment. As time flows, the guard's measured response stands as a living lesson, retold again and again by tour guides and visitors, woven into the evolving cultural narrative of the palace. And beyond the palace walls, everyday folks confront their own challenges: disrespect at work, petty insults online, or conflicts within families, and some remember the guard's example. They recall his words about honoring tradition and respect, and they think twice before letting anger dictate their reactions. Thus, the guard's quiet show of restraint, which once might have been confined to a random day at the palace gates, evolves into a cherished story of moral strength. And for the tourist who started it all with a reckless, arrogant act, the guard's silence ended up speaking louder than any scolding could have. In the end, that silence echoes with a call to be better, to recognize the humanity and dignity in others. As time weaves the event into collective memory, it settles into the realm of modern folklore. People share the story with the same reverence they might share legends of knights and codes of honor, though in a contemporary twist. The guard, going about his duties, occasionally catches snippets of conversations. He hears parents explaining to their children, "This is the spot where a man tested our guard's patience, and the guard responded with dignity." The children stare wide-eyed at the stoic figure, as though he were a hero from a storybook come to life among the palace stones. The guard's fellow servicemen sometimes tease him for his newfound legend, but behind their jokes lies respect. They know full well that discipline, while taught in training, is tested in unexpected moments. The guard had proven that training goes beyond physical drills. It extends into moral character. The tourist's life, meanwhile, undergoes a quiet but steady rehabilitation. He doesn't magically become an exemplar of virtue overnight, but the ripple effects of his guilt push him toward consistent reflection. He sells off some gaudy possessions that once symbolized his wealth. He invests in experiences that enrich his understanding of the world, traveling to see historical sites, reading about cultures he once dismissed. One day, he even returns to the palace, though not during high tourist hours. He walks around the perimeter, viewing it from different angles, contemplating the weight of history that stands within those walls. He sees a small plaque describing the role of the royal guard, its centuries-long lineage, and the heritage it safeguards. He realizes how careless he was to reduce that heritage to a comedic prop. A swirl of emotions, regret, admiration, resolve, passes through him. He notices a few faces in the crowd that recognize him. Instead of flinching, he lifts his chin and offers a nod, a gesture that says he's no longer running from what he did. Many of them do not return any outward sign, but at least one or two manage a half-smile, perhaps seeing his subtle shift in posture. Back in the guards' quarters, an unexpected letter arrives. It is from a small youth charity, praising the guard for inspiring a young volunteer, the tourist, who has apparently been helping them. They explain that the tourist often cites the guard's speech and unwavering demeanor as the catalyst for his desire to improve himself. The guard reads the letter, feeling a rare surge of emotion. He had not realized the full extent of the changes his stance had triggered. Though he cannot break protocol and respond in a personal capacity, he shares the letter with a trusted superior. They both exchange a knowing look. Sometimes the simplest acts have the biggest impact. Days drift into weeks, weeks into months. Eventually, another spectacular changing of the guard ceremony is scheduled, one that draws extra crowds due to a royal celebration. The city fills with visitors. The guard, once again, stands in his designated place. Trumpets blare. The formal march begins. A hush of awe sweeps through the throng of onlookers. Banners wave in the breeze. It's a grand display of tradition and unity that unfolds, reminding everyone of the deep-rooted customs that shape cultural identity. In this crowd stands the tourist, more reserved, quietly taking in the pageantry. He wears simpler clothes, almost nondescript. He watches with genuine fascination, no trace of the mocking attitude he once displayed. As the guard and his fellow servicemen execute their impeccably choreographed routine, the tourist feels a lump in his throat. He recalls that day when he defiled such a uniform with an impulsive act of disrespect. His heart feels heavy, but also full of a new kind of gratitude. The ceremony concludes, and the palace square erupts in applause. For many there, it's just a memorable tourist attraction. For the tourist, however, it signifies the end of a journey, one that began when he threw an ice cream cone at a silent, disciplined man. He knows he might never personally atone for that moment in a way that satisfies everyone, but he has come to terms with it by attempting to live differently. And that, perhaps, is the best redemption he can offer. In the days following the grand ceremony, the story resurfaces once more on social media, reminding people of how disrespect was met with dignity, how a thoughtless act led to a broader lesson. Discussion threads pop up, some praising the guard anew, others noting that the tourist has been seen volunteering and offering apologies wherever possible. A few cynics remain, insisting that leopards don't change their spots, but a more balanced view has emerged in public opinion. People see the power of moral leadership embodied by the guard, but also the potential for personal growth demonstrated by the tourist. The tourist never does get a private meeting with the guard, though a part of him yearns for it. Protocol and duty keep the guard at arm's length. In a way, that might be for the best. Their relationship exists as a lesson carried on the winds of rumor, retellings, and viral posts. It is a phenomenon that belongs to everyone who hears it, an allegory of modern times where humiliation meets courtesy and courtesy wins. More and more travelers come to the palace, hoping to witness something as dramatic as that moment. Yet the guard stands unperturbed day after day, unyielding in his commitment. Disrespectful antics do occur now and then, people making funny faces or shouting rude remarks. But if any consider throwing projectiles, they pause, remembering the condemnation that befell the last who tried. Even small children hush each other, saying, "Don't mess with the guard, he's important." It is an interesting shift. Once, people treated the guards as little more than stoic mannequins. Now, there is a deeper awareness that behind the uniform stands a human being who embodies centuries of service. The tourist eventually leaves the city, carrying with him the lessons that the guard unwittingly imparted. He does not leave behind a triumphant redemption arc, but rather a quiet acceptance that change is a process. By the time he departs, some locals have softened toward him, acknowledging his efforts. Others ignore him, unwilling to forgive or forget. And so, life moves on. The guard continues his watch, faithful and dignified. The tourist pursues a less ostentatious path, mindful of the consequences that arrogance can reap. In households around the world, the viral clip endures as a go-to anecdote whenever people discuss respect for one's uniform or the power of staying calm in the face of provocation. And for those who want to see the moment in person, the palace gates are always open, guarded by men and women who carry on a tradition unbroken by passing trends. Someday the guard may retire, passing the baton to another. But the story of how one man threw ice cream at a royal guard, only to be floored by the guard's unwavering dignity, will remain a reminder of a moral truth that transcends any era. Pride falters in the face of humble strength, and real victory is found in keeping one's honor intact. Media cycles being what they are, the incident eventually recedes from daily headlines. Yet it still lives on in the corners of the internet, in classrooms, and in personal conversations. Teachers use it in lessons about values and ethics, sometimes pairing it with classic fables to show how moral lessons can manifest in modern times. Civilians who have never met a royal guard come to respect them in a new light. In forums and social media groups dedicated to positive news, the guard's measured response continues to pop up as a shining example of composure under fire. People share it as a feel-good story, although it contains a dose of harsh reality too. It underscores the idea that we can be better than our worst impulses. Meanwhile, the guard's daily existence remains largely unchanged. Each morning, he adorns the uniform, each piece meticulously placed. He stands at the palace gates or wherever. He's assigned, shoulders back, eyes forward, tethered to a centuries-old tradition. At times, he recalls the day that thrust him into the spotlight. He remembers the shock of cold ice cream on his chest, the startled hush of the crowd, his measured words echoing in the quiet that followed. The memory no longer stirs resentment, if it ever did. Instead, it has become a milestone, proof that the discipline instilled in him for so many years truly runs deep. He occasionally wonders about the tourist who triggered it all. Perhaps the man has moved on or found a better path. The guard doesn't linger on the thought for long. If anything, he hopes the tourist discovered genuine remorse and changed for the better. That is, after all, the best outcome, that a negative act might spark self-improvement. He shares this viewpoint with younger recruits when they ask about the incident. Though the guard's words are few, he emphasizes that a soldier's duty isn't just about defending a place, it's also about defending values. And standing for values sometimes means absorbing an insult without retaliation. The younger guards listen with respect, their eyes shining with admiration. Some vow to uphold the same level of composure if they ever find themselves tested. New recruits often say that the guard has become a legend within their ranks, a quiet, unassuming hero who turned a moment of potential violence into a teachable, uplifting experience. The guard demurs, gently reminding them that he is simply doing his job. At the tourist's end, life has taken a turn toward introspection. He has withdrawn from the flashy scene that once defined him, focusing on smaller joys. He's been spotted a few times volunteering at youth centers and homeless shelters, partaking in community drives. While some remain skeptical of his motivations, those who work alongside him start to see the earnestness in his actions. Slowly, he rebuilds a sense of self-worth based on kindness, not showmanship. The memory of the palace gates haunts him, but in a constructive way. Each time he finds himself tempted to belittle someone or flaunt his ego, he recalls the guard's unwavering stance and the wave of shame that followed his own foolish display. Instead of letting that shame paralyze him, he channels it into humility. Over months and years, it shapes a new approach to life, one in which each interaction carries an awareness of the inherent dignity in every person. In certain corners of social media, people track these developments. A few post pictures of the tourist volunteering or attending charity events. Some remain critical, calling it a PR stunt, while others see genuine improvement in his demeanor. Whichever side they fall on, the conversation inevitably circles back to the guard and the speech that set the transformation in motion. Had the guard succumbed to anger and lashed out physically, the story might have gone very differently, perhaps overshadowed by controversy or overshadowed by claims of brutality. But because the guard chose calm, the moral lens remained clearly focused on the tourist's wrongdoing and the guard's virtue. This unambiguous clarity allowed the message of respect and dignity to prevail. Eventually, mainstream attention shifts to other stories, as it always does. New viral moments emerge, capturing collective fascination for a while before fading. Yet, for those who experienced or studied this incident, the lesson doesn't vanish. It becomes part of an internal library of examples, one that people refer to when they need guidance on how to handle mockery or confront disrespect. In essence, the guard's example forms a blueprint for responding to conflict with grace. Tour guides at the palace weave the anecdote into their speeches now and then, especially when curious visitors ask if the guards really don't react to provocation. The guides often smile, explaining that the guards are more than capable of reaction. They simply choose their responses with care. Tourists nod, some remembering the viral video that once caused such a stir, others hearing it for the first time and feeling a jolt of amazement. And so, time passes as it always does. Seasons change, guards rotate in and out, new recruits train, older ones retire. The guard who endured the ice cream assault continues to serve until the day he, too, moves on. When his last day at the palace arrives, a quiet ceremony is held among his peers. No crowds, no paparazzi, just a close-knit group acknowledging the years of service. A few mention that famous day, teasing him that they'll never forget, how he put a spoiled tourist in his place without raising a single fist. He smiles faintly, reminded once more that honor can be as simple as standing tall when others expect you to cower or lash out. The tourist, far away, perhaps living in a different country by now, catches wind of the guard's retirement through social media updates. He feels a twinge of gratitude. Despite never meeting the guard face-to-face in a private setting, he feels indebted. The guard's stoic presence changed the trajectory of his life, forcing him to confront his own worst traits. He writes a final, lengthy post on his private blog, a place where he documents his personal journey, thanking the guard by name and acknowledging the moment that brought his arrogance crashing down. Though few may read it, the act of writing it is cathartic for him. In it, he admits that his downfall was inevitable, but the guard's gracious response gave him a lifeline instead of letting him drown in oblivious pride. By the time the guard's retirement is official, the story has taken on a life of its own, living in anecdotes, viral videos, lessons in classrooms, and quiet reflections in living rooms. The guard may no longer stand at the gates, but his example remains embedded in the palace's modern lore. New guards, upon hearing the tale, are inspired to maintain the same unwavering discipline if ever faced with a similar test. And though the original viral fervor subsides, it leaves behind this enduring impression. When a man threw ice cream at a royal guard, expecting an easy victory or comedic punch, he instead encountered the firm backbone of tradition, discipline, and moral strength. That moral strength did more than neutralize the insult. It changed the trajectory of the one who cast it, urging him to grow into a more considerate, respectful version of himself. Few stories carry a moral that resonates so widely, from the guards and tourists around the palace gates to individuals thousands of miles away. But this one does. In it, people see a reflection of their own choices when provoked. They see that sometimes the loudest answer is silence, and that sometimes the strongest stance is the one taken without physical retaliation. The guard simply stood there, wiping away the ice cream, delivering a few calm words, and in doing so, turned the tourist's arrogance inside out. It remains a testament to how a single act of self-restraint can ripple across countless lives, reminding us all that composure can triumph over ego. In the final reflection, the guard, now retired, lives a quieter life away from the public eye. Yet the echoes of his moment of calm heroism persist. He occasionally receives letters or online messages from strangers who track him down, telling him how the story of his poised response influenced their own handling of conflict. Each note reaffirms the enduring power of a single act of integrity. The tourist, for his part, continues on his path of self-improvement. It's not a straight line. He slips back into old habits at times, but the memory of that day at the palace gates lingers like a guiding compass. Whenever he feels the pull of arrogance, he remembers the guard's unwavering stance and checks himself. Over the years, he manages to rebuild parts of his reputation, forging relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than superficial admiration. If people inquire about the famous ice cream incident, he doesn't hide from it. He candidly recounts the moment and what it taught him, hoping his candor might prevent others from making similar mistakes. The story, therefore, doesn't vanish into obscurity. It evolves into a multifaceted lesson that parents pass to children, teachers include in curricula, and everyday citizens share as a moral tale. It remains relevant because its core themes, honor, dignity, respect, self-restraint, are timeless, bridging divides of culture and background. Whether told around a family dinner table or shared in an online forum, it continues to captivate precisely because it's grounded in real life. It asks each of us to consider how we'd behave under the same circumstances and whether we have the discipline to choose respect over rage. In a world teeming with quick trigger responses, the guard's method provides an alternate route. Eventually, the last swirling bits of media attention fade into the wider backdrop of modern life. But the lesson remains. Dignity can disrupt. Arrogance, composure can topple provocation, and a measured voice can echo more powerfully than a shouted insult. By simply standing firm, the guard turned an act of disrespect into a universal story of moral triumph. Years later, children still visit the palace. They cluster at the gates, trying to peer through or coax a reaction from the current guards. But many of them already know the story of the guard who once stood here, the man who faced insult and responded with quiet strength. For some young visitors, that story is an inspiration. For others, a cautionary tale. When they ask their parents about it, they learn that real bravery often resides in patience and courtesy, not in aggression or flashy comebacks. And so the story concludes, not with a grand spectacle, but with a gentle ripple of transformation that flows through individual hearts. The guard taught everyone present, and millions more who watched, that the best victories are moral ones, won not by force or vengeance, but by steadfast adherence to principles. It might have started with a foolish throw of an ice cream cone, but it ended in a lesson that remains long after the ice cream melted away. If you've made it this far, take a moment to reflect on how respect and dignity shape your own life. If you agree that the strongest response to hostility is often the calmest one, share this message in your own way. Let it remind those around you that restraint can be a powerful virtue, that humility can guide us when pride threatens to mislead us. And finally, remember that each day we stand guard over our own actions, capable of choosing how we respond when provoked. Should you ever find yourself on either side of such a confrontation, recall this story. Let it steer you toward honor. Let it show you that dignity can indeed prevail over the most brazen acts, and that in the quiet aftermath of composure, real strength emerges for all to witness and admire.